Hi, my name's James Hewitt and I'm an accredited exercise physiologist with iFitness Exercise Physiology on the Central Coast. Thanks for joining us through our Exercise 101 course. In this video, I'm going to be talking to you about cardiovascular or aerobic training. So sit back and enjoy, and I trust you get a lot out of it. As we've mentioned in our first video, cardio training is predominantly focused on the strength and function of your heart and blood vessels. This type of training is often categorized by activity that uses large muscle groups in rhythmical movements and usually performed for a period of time as opposed to a number of repetitions. When we talk about aerobic training, we are often talking about activities that improve our fitness. Classic examples of aerobic training are cycling, walking, running, swimming. However, there may be heaps of other activities that can be used as cardio exercise. Things like kayaking, dancing, stair climbing, rowing, really any other activity that can cause a sustained increase in heart rate and that can be performed for at least 10 minutes at a time. As we've said, cardio or aerobic training is what we're looking at when we talk about improving our fitness. But what exactly is fitness? To simply put, fitness can be thought of as a measure of efficiency. The more efficient your body is at using and producing energy, the fitter you are. Just like if your car is efficient, it can do more and go further with comparatively less fuel than an inefficient car. Technically speaking, the more oxygen your body is able to use, the more aerobically fit you are. The maximum volume of oxygen that your body is able to consume is known as your VO2 max. Measuring VO2 max is considered the gold standard of aerobic fitness testing, and a high VO2 max indicates a higher fitness level. You may have seen VO2 max tests being done on the news or on shows, particularly with athletes, where they're wearing a mask and typically either running on a treadmill or walking on a bike. The mask then is attached to a tube, which goes into a cart called a metabolic cart and a computer. So the metabolic cart analyzes the amount of oxygen and carbon dioxide that people are breathing out and can directly measure the volume of oxygen that you can consume. The regular cardiovascular training has lots of benefits, but to go through a few, there's a reduced risk of cardiovascular disease, it makes your heart muscles stronger, it gives you more energy, better sleep, a reduction in all-cause mortality risk. And if you're not familiar with this term, this is simply, it reduces your risk of dying from any preventable cause. And studies put this as high as a 30% reduction in this risk, which is massive. A lower blood pressure, it lowers your cholesterol. A better use of insulin in the body, it improves your mental health, it reduces your cancer risk, and gives you better digestive function. As we've discussed in our first video, the Australian guidelines with respect to cardiovascular exercise recommend accumulating 150 to 300 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity or 75 to 150 minutes of vigorous intensity physical activity, or an equivalent combination of both moderate and vigorous activities each week. The great thing about this is it can be done in bouts of as little as 10 minutes of moderate intensity. So if you don't have 30 minutes to go for a moderate intensity walk, or maybe you physically can't go for that long to start with, if you can just do 3 lots of 10 minutes, you get the same benefit. And you can add those minutes towards your 150 to 300 minute target per week. Previously, we've talked about how the body works on a cycle of stress and recovery in order to adapt. In aerobic training, we place a load or a stress on the cardiovascular system by getting your heart rate to go faster and more blood to start flowing through your blood vessels. As your heart rate goes up during exercise, so does your blood pressure. This temporary stress on your heart and blood vessels results in your body adapting by making your heart stronger and your blood vessels more elastic, and so they don't have to work as hard at rest. This reduces your resting heart rate and your blood pressure and reduces your risk of cardiovascular disease. Exercise also helps with lowering stress, and it releases endorphins, which make you feel good, which in turn improves your mental health. By exercising, you increase blood flow and movement around your body, including your digestive system, and this can reduce constipation and reduce your risk of bowel cancer. By making your heart stronger and better able to deliver oxygen around your body, you become better at generating and using energy. This means there's more energy left over to do the things you love, and not just grind through a day of work and collapse on the couch at 6. If after a normal day, you regularly get home exhausted, your body might be trying to tell you that you're just not fit enough to live the life that you're trying to live. You can push through this for a while, maybe years, but eventually something will give. In our first video, we briefly discussed moderate intensity being the effort that results in a slight increase in breathing that is enough to still allow you to talk but would leave you feeling a bit puffy and probably unable to sing a song. This is a really great way of measuring intensity, but there are of course many others depending on what you like and what you have access to. One of these other ways to measure intensity is using what's called a rating of perceived exertion scale, which is commonly referred to as a Borg scale. This traditionally uses a 6 to 20 scale to rate effort from no exertion at all to maximum exertion. Most of the time we use a modified version of this scale, which is 0 to 10, to make it a little bit more relatable. The idea of this is that you rate how hard you feel like you're working. For moderate intensity, we're looking at around 13 to 15 on a 6 to 20 point scale, or 3 to 5 on a 10 point scale. So you might be wondering, why would you use a 6 to 20 scale? What benefit is that? Who measures anything on a 6 to 20 scale? Well, interestingly enough, if you take a number, let's say I rated myself as 11 out of 20 on a 6 to 20 Borg scale, if you add a 0 to that number, it actually correlates pretty closely to heart rate. So at an 11 out of 20, there's a pretty good chance that my heart rate would be about 110 beats a minute. Another popular way to measure intensity is by using heart rate. And this can be done using a heart rate monitor or simply by feeling your pulse and counting. Typically, when we're deciding what your heart rate should be during exercise, we often use percentages of your maximum heart rate, which equate to light, moderate, or vigorous exercise. The best case scenario with this is that you've had a stress test or a graded exercise tolerance test, and then we'll know exactly what your maximum heart rate is from this test. However, if you haven't had one of these, and most people haven't, we can estimate it. There are a few ways of doing this. However, the easiest and most common is to simply use 220 minus your age. This will give you a predicted maximum heart rate. Light exercise will typically be classified up to about 60% of this number. Moderate intensity will be between about 60 and 85%, and vigorous will be over 85%. And that's really quite hard. It's quite a big effort. So these apply broadly to most people. However, if you are taking classes of medication like beta blockers, or you have pre-existing conditions, this may be slightly different for you, and it's best to come and get a one-on-one so that we can discuss your individual needs. As you might expect, the harder you work, typically the better the benefit. However, if we were to look at this on a graph, we would see a little bit of a law of diminishing results, in that moderate intensity is significantly more beneficial than light intensity, but the gap isn't quite as significant between moderate and vigorous activity. Therefore, we often recommend people at least start with moderate intensity, as it's safe for just about everybody, regardless of your age or if you've got pre-existing medical conditions or chronic illnesses. For the most part, vigorous exercise does still appear to be safe for healthy individuals and for those with chronic illnesses. However, at this point personally, I feel that there are a few gaps in the research with this, and so I still recommend that for people with pre-existing conditions or who haven't exercised before, to at least start with moderate intensity. Aside from any safety issues, starting with moderate intensity is good because you're less likely to get injured. You're more likely to feel pretty good afterwards, and you're less likely to get delayed onset muscle soreness, which we've previously discussed. All these things to the person who is new to exercise means that you're more likely to have a good experience afterwards, and you're more likely to do it again and again, which, let's face it, is exactly what we're trying to get people to do. Lots of people have questions about high intensity interval training or HIIT training, and this has become really, really popular over the last few years. And for those who are able and safe to do so, this is a really great and useful form of training to improve your fitness. If you're not familiar with what it is, HIIT training involves doing shorter bouts of something or some kind of activity might be as short as 20 seconds up to a few minutes, and it's typically done at a very high intensity. And the activity is broken up with periods of rest, and this can either be passive, which is just sitting around or resting, standing up, or active rest, which is doing maybe another activity that's less intense, it's a light intensity, say for example, or maybe just doing some walking in between. Very basically, HIIT training allows you to improve your fitness faster with shorter session lengths. And I, like many others, often find it a little bit more enjoyable, as you can vary the activity a little bit more between sets, and you only have to focus on working hard for a much shorter period of time when you compare it to, say, going for a long duration, moderate intensity walk or run. The downsides are that it may not be suitable for everyone, and it may increase your risk of injury depending on the activity and other factors as well. There is a lot of research on HIIT training and its benefits for different groups of people. As I mentioned, it tends to result in faster fitness gains in shorter session times. Because you're working at a higher intensity, it often results in more calories burned as well. So all this sounds pretty good. However, if you can't do HIIT training, or you're not keen on it, the research does seem to suggest that if you were to match HIIT sessions and longer moderate duration sessions for total energy expenditure, which just means if you did the moderate training for long enough that you burnt the same amount of calories as you would during the HIIT session, the results tend to level out and there doesn't seem to be as much difference between the two. So as we've discussed, aerobic training on the whole is very safe and effective for just about everyone, no matter your age or health status. However, if you do have underlying health issues, and particularly relating to your heart or cancer, it's best to come in and see us for a more detailed assessment so that we can tailor the advice to your individual needs and circumstances. Generally though, when we're talking about safety around aerobic training, there are a few things to keep in mind. So the first of these is start slow and work up. If you are new to exercise or have injuries, the guidelines are recommended levels, but are not necessarily the right starting level for everyone. Always do a warm-up and cool down. So a warm-up is designed to increase the muscle temperature, which makes them function better and more resilient to injury. It's easier on the heart to gradually work your way up. So a warm-up is basically just an in-between level of exertion between resting and the exertion you're going to do through exercise. So it's a bit easier on your heart to ramp up that way. It also allows for an increase in muscle oxygenation, so it means that more oxygen can get into the muscles, which helps them function better. And last of all, it allows for something called vasodilation, which just means that your blood vessels get bigger to allow more blood flow through to them. This helps for a lot of reasons, but when we're talking about cardiovascular disease, it means the blood vessels that supply your heart muscle can get bigger, and so if there are any blockages, it reduces your risk of getting things like angina. A cool down is also really important and is basically the same as a warm-up but in reverse, and it's designed to reduce your heart rate and blood pressure in a more controlled manner. So this improves blood flow back to the heart after exercise and reduces things like arrhythmias, which are just abnormal heart rates or rhythms. Ideally, your warm-up should go for at least 3 to 5 minutes. The next thing is to avoid exercising in extremes of hot and cold temperatures. Make sure you wear loose and comfortable clothing and appropriate footwear. If you do have a history of angina and you've been prescribed angina medication or Ventolin, make sure you carry it with you when you exercise. Avoid exercising if you feel unwell. Make sure you respond to any symptoms of discomfort, and make sure you're familiar with what the signs are of angina and heart attack and know what to do if you do feel them. And last of all, make sure that you follow the advice given to you by healthcare professionals. As someone who's spent over a decade specialising in cardiac rehab, I know firsthand the benefits of regular aerobic training, and I hope this video has given you some useful information and maybe even some motivation to help with your training. If you or someone you know needs help getting active, please don't hesitate to contact us. We'd love to help you out. So make sure you look for our next video in this series. I'm James Hewitt, accredited exercise physiologist with iFitness. Till next time.